My new neighbor is acting strange, and now I know why. I've always valued peace and quiet, so when I had the chance to move to the suburbs, I jumped at it. The house I rented was perfect, a small 2-story building on a quiet street with minimal traffic, surrounded by trees. But as soon as I moved in, I started noticing something odd. My neighbor, an elderly man, lived across the street. At first, he seemed completely ordinary, gray hair, calm demeanor, always quiet. He never greeted me, but I chalked it up to old age and introversion. The only thing that really bothered me was that he never turned off the lights in his house. No matter the time of day or night, his windows were always bathed in bright yellow light. One evening, as I was returning home, I noticed him standing on his porch, staring at me. His gaze was empty and intense, as if he was trying to figure out who I was. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just another quirk of old age, but his behavior only got stranger. Every night, as soon as the town fell silent, I heard noises coming from his house. At first, it was just footsteps, quiet but distinct, as if someone was slowly walking around. But then there were stranger sounds, muffled voices, whispers, as if someone was having a hushed conversation behind the walls. Sometimes, I even heard a light tapping on my windows, but when I looked outside, no one was there. Finally, one night, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to go outside and take a closer look at my neighbor's house. As I approached, I peered through the window of his living room, and what I saw made my heart freeze in fear. He was sitting in a chair in the middle of the room, but there was something unnatural about the scene. Strange symbols were drawn all over the walls of his house, and the air was thick with the smell of incense. But the most terrifying thing wasn't that. In the corner of the room stood a human figure. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, but when it turned its head and looked directly at me, I jumped back. I don't know what it was, but it couldn't have been a person. It stared at me with its white, colorless eyes, as if studying me. I ran back to my house and locked myself inside, my heart pounding with fear. I couldn't sleep that night, and the next day, I decided to talk to my neighbors. What they told me still sends chills down my spine. Apparently, my neighbor is not who he seems to be. They said the man who lived in that house had died years ago. But everyone who has lived across from that house has heard the footsteps, seen the lights in the windows, and felt the presence of the neighbor. They warned me never to get too close to his house, and especially not to look inside. But now I know too much, and I think whatever that thing is, it knows I've seen it. Since that day, the light in the neighbor's house never goes out, and every time I pass by his window, I can feel someone's eyes watching me. The man in the closet. This happened a couple of years ago, but I still think about it, and every time, a cold sweat runs down my back. I was just a regular college student living in an old apartment that I rented for next to nothing. The place wasn't the best, but I was young and I didn't care much about the shabby walls or old repairs. All I needed was a bed and a bit of peace. My bedroom was quite small, with a large old wardrobe standing against the wall across from my bed. The wardrobe was massive, with creaky wooden doors. I rarely used it, preferring to store my things in a suitcase under the bed. But the wardrobe? It always caught my attention. Even when I tried to fall asleep, I often found myself staring at it, feeling a strange sense of unease. One night, after a long day of studying, I collapsed into bed, completely exhausted. I fell asleep quickly, but in the middle of the night, something woke me up. I opened my eyes and saw that the wardrobe door was slightly ajar. I was sure I had closed it earlier. The light from the street lamp was spilling through a gap in the curtains, casting a faint glow across the room. I glanced at the wardrobe and felt my heart tighten in fear. In the gap between the doors, I saw something that looked like eyes. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but the longer I stared, the more convinced I became that someone or something was watching me from inside the wardrobe. I froze. Cold sweat ran down my neck. One question echoed in my mind. Who's there? I lay still for what felt like forever, but eventually my curiosity got the better of me. Slowly, I got out of bed, feeling a shiver run through my whole body. As I approached the wardrobe, I yanked the doors open, but inside it was empty, just old hangers, swaying slightly from my movement. I sighed in relief and closed the wardrobe. Just my imagination, I thought. But when I got back into bed and closed my eyes again, I heard the creak. I opened my eyes and saw the wardrobe door was open again. And this time, the eyes inside were closer. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I jumped up, turned on the light, and was about to run out of the apartment, but I heard a voice. It was quiet, barely audible. "You shouldn't have looked." I don't remember how I made it to the door, but I left the apartment that same night and never went back. I never found out who or what was hiding in that closet that night, but every time I see an old wardrobe in someone's house or in a photograph, I feel a chill down my spine. Since then, I never leave closets open at night. The Cabin in the Woods. On a chilly October evening, Emily and her friends decided to take a weekend trip to a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods. It was supposed to be a getaway from the stress of their city lives, a place to relax, drink some wine, and share stories by the fire. The cabin, old and weathered, stood silent among the towering trees, its wooden walls creaking as if whispering forgotten secrets. The first night went smoothly. They laughed, told spooky stories, and went to bed late. But on the second night, strange things began to happen. It started with a faint tapping sound coming from the walls. At first, they dismissed it as the wind or the old wood settling. But as the night wore on, the noises became louder, more deliberate, almost like someone, or something, was trying to get inside. Emily woke up in the middle of the night, feeling an uneasy chill run down her spine. She could hear the others snoring softly in their rooms, but something felt wrong. The tapping had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. She strained her ears, listening for anything out of place, when suddenly there was a loud knock on the front door. Her heart raced. Who could be out here, in the middle of nowhere, at this hour? She tiptoed towards the door, her breath shallow, every step feeling heavier than the last. "Don't open it!" a voice inside her head screamed, but curiosity got the better of her. She peeked through the peephole, but there was no one there, just the empty, dark forest stretching into the distance. She stepped back, relieved, thinking it was just her imagination. But then the knock came again, this time louder, more forceful, as if whatever was out there was impatient. Emily froze. Suddenly, all the lights in the cabin flickered and went out. The darkness was suffocating, and the only sound now was the rapid beating of her heart. In the blackness, she heard it, a soft whisper coming from right behind her. Cold breath brushed against her neck, and she spun around, but nothing was there. Trembling, she fumbled for her phone, using its weak light to scan the room. The shadows seemed to stretch and move like they were alive. Just then, a blood-curdling scream echoed from one of the bedrooms. Emily ran, her legs weak with fear, towards her friend's room. She burst through the door, only to find her friend standing in the middle of the room, staring blankly at the wall. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, her mouth open in a silent scream. And on the wall, written in blood-red letters, was a message that made Emily's blood run cold. "It's already inside." Suddenly, the cabin felt like a cage, and Emily realized with a sinking horror that there was no escape. The thing they had feared all along wasn't outside, trying to get in. It was already with them.